Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So, what is a vision for a healthy being? If it's not something that's attached to weight specifically, or body shape specifically, or even anything as related to the body, what would true health look like? This is a question that motivated me the summer of 2017, leaving the city of DC and setting out on my travels around the world, because I witnessed, even though I had a physically healthy body, I had taught fitness classes for years, I had taught yoga, that I actually felt a bit out of control in my relationships to substance. And that's not even with an explicit addiction, but it was recognizing the amount of caffeine, sugar, alcohol that I was consuming, these ups and downs that I would go on, as well as my relationship to my own menstrual cycle and bloating and feeling this out of equilibrium with my environment, and believing and sensing that there is a greater way that I could live and exist. And so pretty soon after getting on the road and living out of a backpack, the amount of, let's call them non-necessary things that I was consuming was greatly reduced. And that's because one of the first experiences that I had abroad was throwing up everything that I had just eaten in a day. And this did not come from food poisoning specifically. This actually came from dehydration. And throwing up and becoming sick out of dehydration was one through line that happened throughout my travels in Asia. It would happen specifically on a day that I would end up in a very, very hot place, not be tracking, and be out and traveling and not thinking about it. And the effect on my body was so strong, and I'd never really had to deal with dehydration before that because I've never lived in places that were that hot. And for most people in my life, they know I'm drinking water constantly. I'm filling up ice all the time. There's theories on warmer, cold water. I personally love cold water, even though warm water is better for digestion. But hydration became this pillar in my life. So I'm not here to say that water is the key to all health issues, but I'm just saying that this was a pretty transformational experience to have, to actually experience sickness based off of dehydration, because it is the number one thing that we actually get free and easy access to in the West. And yet we do not take, we take it for granted. I recently went to Jordan, and I was telling a friend of mine who was about to go that one of the greatest challenges for me was the water pressure. And when I showered, and because you're also so hot and you're in the desert and you want to shower. And after she got home, she was like, well, the reason for that is that there's actually a shortage of water. And then I was just on a trip in Costa Rica, and I had a day where we had these big group bathrooms and showers where we were staying at this retreat, and we would get in these long conversations while we were brushing our teeth and showering and all in here. And someone just stepped out of her shower to continue a conversation with some of us, and her water was just running. And I was like, no, do not leave it running. So water is this absolutely necessary, this foundation for our health, right? We cannot live. Someone also on this retreat asked the question, how long can you live without food? How long can you live without water? How long can you live without breath? So water and breath are things that we need on a minute to minute basis, a second to second basis, minute to minute basis, and a day to day basis. And yet they're the least valued things. And they are both being threatened by our relationship to the environment as it exists. And so how do we shift our relationship individually to breath and water? And how do we shift our relationship collectively to the air that to how we care for the air and how we care for water? So those are some larger questions that I think our society would greatly benefit from if we incorporated that into what health is, that unfortunately do not get asked, because we live in a capitalist society that would love to push the buying and the consumption of one thing after the other after the other. And unfortunately, even the fitness industry becomes a major extension of this, of doing and making and creating and moving. And even yoga, which is this path of stillness and quietness, becomes this: buy these yoga shorts and buy this bra and do it like this and do your down dogs and do. How do we slow down? How do we center? How do we balance? How do we find equilibrium? And these questions are at the foundation of any type of fitness and health work that I do in my own personal life, in the model that I'm developing in my business. But they're also going to be questions that I pose at you when I work with you, because these questions are personal to your body, to your lifestyle, and ultimately to your purpose. And so, what does your purpose have to do with your health? Well, I believe that many wisdom traditions point to the complete interconnection of body, mind, and consciousness. You can call consciousness spirit or soul. When I'm referring to it, I'm talking about this essence part of yourself that actually is beyond thinking and feeling. So the way you can get in touch with this essence is meditation. It is the closing of the eyes. It is the shutting down of all of the sensory stimulation and becoming an observer in your own being. And how to cultivate this, there's different ideas and tactics and methods, but that's just an opportunity for you to connect with this very core part of your being. And that this core part of the being gets listened to is so essential for the transformation of your own personal health and our collective health, I believe. Because if not, we actually don't have what's the purpose of moving the body? What's the purpose? We can take all this capitalistic thinking and actually take it directly into how we approach our health. And if we actually truly want to be healthy, we need to be attacking, or I shouldn't say attacking, but really facing and tackling this endless approach to living that is currently fueling our society, the way we relate to each other, and impacting the way we relate to health. We actually need to address that. And then we need to address that in the way that we even address our bodies. So being careful that we're not just plugging into a health model that's get the supplement and go to the gym here and go and if whatever gets you moving, wonderful. And I'm in the business of sustainable health. And sustainable health is going to have to do with a personal journey and a collective journey, because there's one ocean and there's one atmosphere that we breathe. And so even though we each have a personal journey, we also rely on elements that we are all participating in. So that being said, the vision for health, in my perspective and working with me, is going to be me asking you about your personal journey. It's also always going to be with a commitment to the link between the physical, the mental, the energetic, the conscious. And here again, I'm separating energetic and conscious. You could say those are the same thing, depending on which methodology you use, what framework you're coming from. But these are different parts that root back to a framework within yoga that says we have 5 bodies: the food body, that's the physical body, the mental body, the energy body, the conscious body, and the bliss body, which is really this part of ourselves that even no matter what our soul is going through, our consciousness is going through, there's a part of us that deeply knows bliss, and we can tap into that. So that being said, I want to actually pull a couple ideas from the book that I made a previous video about. It's called Food, Agriculture, and Community, Food, Farmer, and Community. And the reason I'm pulling from this book, A Vision for Health, is because this book is oriented around how we might reconstruct the world so that there's enough resources for everyone and that people are actually participating in that. And to hold this vision, I believe we can actually have the entry point for coming into greater health. Because without the vision for a world where people are actually getting their basic bodily needs met, we're fundamentally disconnected from this part of ourselves that knows that my health is connected to somebody else's health. And that my health is not just about moving for the sake of moving, but actually uniting with this inner purpose, and this inner purpose that knows that I'm inextricably linked to other people. So this vision for health is not just about what I weigh, what my body looks like. It's not about what anyone else can see at all, actually. This view of health is going to be this Kickstarter within my being that actually creates listening within my system and makes it that I actually, or at least begins the journey for me to actually be in relation both to myself, to the people around me, and to the world that I'm a part of. So all of this list that I made here in a notebook was actually pulling out language from this book, specifically on the part on health. And then I'll speak to why I think that these are important. So first off, a vision for health outside of just the physical body. In the yogic tradition as well, they have something called yamas and niyamas, which is basically this respect for the internal being and respect for the people next to us, outside of us. Because, and the yogic philosophy says, if we don't even have this, if we don't have the connection to self and a certain way in which we're treating ourselves, and we don't have this connection to the world around us, the people around us, then we're already going to be so not at rest that when we sit down to actually work on our own being, it's going to be very hard to focus. It's going to be very hard to connect these different pieces. So that's from the yogic tradition. In this book, they talked about this vision for being free of violence and force and free of constraint and oppression. And I think these are so essential because these violence and force and constraint and oppression, sometimes we think of these as outer. So violence and force, you might think of war and conflict and abuse, and constraint and oppression, you might think of oppressive structures like racism and sexism, or oppressive workplaces. But oppression and constraint and violence and force, they also are things that are happening within us. They're also ways we relate to ourselves. And so we can take what's happening out there, we can actually bring it into ourselves and actually be quite violent and forceful with ourselves, or quite oppressive and constraining to ourselves. So to actually start to work on those things in the outer world, we actually have to start to work on them with ourselves and commit to a way of being with ourselves that is distinct from forcing ourselves into something, and that's also distinct from constraining and oppressing ourselves. And this is going to create a new relationship to our very being. I feel like my voice actually got quieter talking about this because it is so beautiful. It's so beautiful if we could actually care this much about our health, not just in the performative ways, not just in how we look, but truly deeply in how we relate to who we are. So with this, we also want this vision of a level of freedom from substance. And that means that we are activating, this book talks about bringing in substance and drugs where we are striving to come back to equilibrium, but ultimately striving for a life where we are not dependent on them. And this is also going to be a long-term thing, right? This is not to like convict whatever relationship you have to drugs, but it's to hold this vision for a body equilibrium, a body-mind equilibrium. That obviously is something that also has to happen collectively too. So our individual relationship to drugs is obviously very related to, right now, the social pushing of these things. And by drugs, I'm not just talking about prescription medication or non-prescription medication. I'm also talking about sugar, alcohol, and let's just start there. Sugar, alcohol, the level of food reconstruction we've done around things that are not real food, but we consume on a day-to-day basis. So we want to start to shift our relationship to these things, come into a greater relationship to natural food, and then ultimately have this vision for equilibrium within our own system. With this, we want freedom from an extinguished mind to an enlivened mind, from a frozen spirit to a free spirit, from a petrified soul to a soul, I put the word provoked, a soul that's actually moved, from a wasted body to a body that's actually able to be used and accessed, from a state of being where there's frustration and loss predominating to a state where there can be excitement, bounty, clarity, and leadership. There's this access to this spiritual wine. So in the same way we know drunkenness in the substance state, we can invite in a kind of drunkenness that comes from relationship to this magnetic attractive force that exists freely in the universe. We have this opportunity to go from a weakened body to a strengthened body, to a space of health and vigor. to the expansion and keenness of the mind and bodily strength, to have strength and physical courage, to have health, beauty, attraction, to stand up, to actually, in one of the writings in here, it talks about like when we have this strength of this kind, one person who's dedicated themselves to this could stand up to an entire tribe. We want this outward and inward transformation. We have a vision for freedom of chronic disease, a strengthening of the nerves, of refinement, of the preservation of health, of being leaders, of freedom from enslavement, knowledge and self-control, wisdom, and receiving our gifts of intellect and the faculty of comprehension. And then getting to actually be a light, capital L. So, and one other note from these is that this underlying shift of values would actually have to come. And that also that our health journey is related to our moral development as well. It's not something that just can come from a physical existence, but it does have to come from this greater depth, because it's also going to take a commitment to transformed policies, goals, and programs that actually prioritize the physical, spiritual, mental, and social well-being of not just ourselves, but the planet. So I love these definitions. Again, if I work with you, I'm going to actually pull forth what matters to you. But I think putting forth a vision for health is so important. And I'm going to make a couple videos from the vision for health in more depth, from yoga, from Taoism. But this specifically is just this entry point, because we don't have a vision for health. Our medical system is disease preventative, but not proactive in health. And so then the fitness industry the fitness industry and athletics tends to take the front page. And we have this association with health that have to do with muscles and six packs and abs and very, very visual, superficial gains that actually have a lot more to do with being out of health and out of equilibrium to even achieve that. And so I feel that it's so fundamental to really begin to intertwine the goals of energy, spirit, consciousness with mind, thinking, feeling, expression, relationship with body. Because when one of those areas gets fueled, the others also get fueled, as opposed to working on one from this place of force or constraint. I hope this helps, and please let me know what questions you still are holding.